Home Affairs Department's draft revised white paper on citizenship, immigration and refugee protection is now open for public comment until the 31st of this month. It aims to improve visa processes, prevent fraud, boost national security and support economic growth. Key reforms cover refugee management, civil registration, citizenship as well as immigration. Let's unpack what this draft white paper actually entails and how it affects you and me and why participation is important. Immigration lawyer Ashrav Essop is joining us now. Ashrav, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning and thanks for the opportunity.
Now, Ashrav, this is a revised draft. There was the initial one was released in 2022. What are the significant changes between that paper and this one that has been approved, that was approved in 2023 and now out for public comment?
It's interesting to note that the first draft white paper was published in 2017. It's taken a very long road to get to where we are today. But as you've pointed out in the introduction, there are four areas of reform. The first one being to combat the phenomenon of picking and choosing South Africa as a preferred destination for asylum seekers while passing through other safe countries on the way. So the refinement and implementation of the first safe country principle is in the white paper and states that the asylum seekers who have been granted refugee status or lawful protection in another country or who pass through a safe third country are ineligible for asylum in South Africa. Now you can imagine that this has a significant impact on people from all over the world that choose South Africa as the safe haven because of its generous laws for the protection of human rights. Now, there's a very important phenomenon which is used as a, let's say, last resort defense for asylum seekers, and that is the principle of non-refoulement. So even if the claim appears to be, let's say, found to be unsustainable based on the RSDO's, the Refugee Status Determining Officer's examination of the facts, he may find that he's faced with the defense of non-refoulement, which means that you can't be sent back to your country if, for example, that country implements the death penalty. Now, in order to mitigate the risk, then the Minister of Home Affairs has to, on an annual basis, designate safe third countries that have ratified the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, and he may be able to withdraw such designation as and when the need arises. Now, the government also will have a mandate to enter into bilateral agreements with safe third countries in order for the burden of migration in sub-Saharan Africa to be shared on a more equitable basis. We know that the greatest amount of refugees are from our neighboring states. And for example, that system was overrun and replaced in the case of Zimbabweans with the ZEP, which is now extended till June or July of 2027. So by adopting this focus on a regional migration flow, South Africa will be positioned to support the implementation of the UNHCR Commissioner for Refugees. So a route-based approach seeks to approach the focus of individual countries towards an entire route for migration. So you can see what they're trying to do is not just say, okay, I've come from wherever in the world to your borders, let me in, I'm applying in terms of your Refugees Act. So the very, very clear focus on saying, why, for example, didn't you apply in the first country that you went to? And that'll have an impact definitely on your application. If you want, we can move on to other areas of reform, such as citizenship.
Sure. Very briefly explain, I mean, that you went at great lengths to explain the first safe country principle, and it's one of 4. If you could just very briefly explain the citizenship one, I think it's important to where we are going in the conversation.
So if you look at the 2017 paper, it speaks of no pipeline, no automatic pipeline, for example, for naturalization. Let's just focus on that. Naturalization is aimed at moving from either refugee status or from moving from one of the recognized permanent residents in terms of the Immigration Act. So let's say marriage, right? So now what the reform is saying, there's no automatic pipeline that takes you from status to PR, that's permanent residence, and ultimately after 5 years being eligible for citizenship. Now they're speaking of a merit-based criteria for naturalization and an annual window period for the submission of applicants to prevent backlog. So, we have a huge backlog problem there. And it envisages a citizenship advisory panel to objectively consider and advise on the application. So they're talking of a points-based system as an economic pathway to citizenship. Now, that means, like in terms of the present work permits, you have to get 100 points. So you'll have to have some kind of degree, you're going to have some kind of recognition of skill, you must be able to pass that skill on. So those are the considerations that they will take into account for the merit-based approach, as opposed to, as I've explained, just based on time in the country, either as a refugee or as an immigration permit holder. Yeah. So this will continue existing in parallel to all existing principles, that including the fact that a South African child with at least one parent at the time of his birth who was a South African will automatically become a citizen, right, while a child born to non-South African parents has to apply for naturalization. As we've spoken, naturalization is one of those areas of concern. So I don't think it affects birthright, citizenship, or citizenship by descent or by birth, because there are other parts of the law that dictate that kind of application. And that really is the bedrock for citizenship, and that won't be disturbed in my view.
Ashrav, these are significant changes that you mentioned, these 2 of the 4. Now, in order for government to enact them, the paper proposes that the country withdraws from, for instance, the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, as well as the 1967 Protocol. Would this not put then South Africa in breach of other treaties that it is signatory to, which would compel it to protect the rights of migrants?
Yes, that is a challenge, and that's why the government is now asking civil society for their input, so that they could say that this is the feeling on the ground. Now, no treaty is cast in stone, and you can, as we've seen in recent days, a lot of treaties have been broken and reformed. So I think that the approach is not that you throw out the entire protocol that we've observed over the years. All it means is you're asking for, as the erstwhile minister said, many mistakes were made in accepting all of these treaties wholesale. You're asking for exemptions, and the erstwhile minister pointed out that some of our neighboring countries have asked for exemptions from the entire treaty. So that is the way that they envisage positioning themselves in observing the obligations in terms of treaties that we've already entered into, and taking into account South Africa's own special needs. Now, this entire approach to reform has been considered with a number of players, including our our economic reforms, the conditions of the economy in the country, and how citizens and permanent residents are affected by vast number of people coming into the country. So there's a very clear focus to try and reform that so that it rejuvenates economic growth. That's the way I understand the reasoning to be, but certainly not a wholesale withdrawal from the treaties.
You are right with regards to reviving the economy, Ashrav. I mean, some human rights and immigration organizations that have made their submissions argue that these changes could also foster some level of xenophobia. What do you have to say about that?
Xenophobia was well catered for as a concern in the 2002 Immigration Act. Before we had the Aliens Control Act, and then we had the Immigrations Act. Because in the preamble, it actually speaks to xenophobia and the avoidance of xenophobia. Now xenophobia is a very difficult thing to try and control, because you don't know in which part of the country this thing is brewing and why it is brewing. So the fact that xenophobia was mentioned was a concern of the government at that stage. Now, we've seen flare-ups all over. We've seen a lot of immigration activities by our Department of Home Affairs, border management agencies, in trying to stem the tide of illegal immigration. I think the problem is not racism or xenophobia. It is the fact that people are competing on the low end for very scarce resources, and that does create some kind of tension. And the way to clean that up is obviously to make sure that South Africa's borders are safe from all kinds of penetration. Now, just in this week, it was worrying to see that a number of male children were found in terrible circumstances, and they all appeared to have come from another country. They didn't even understand English. Now you can imagine if there's a xenophobic response to that, those children could have been beaten up. So I think sometimes xenophobia is overemphasized. And South Africa, I must say, has a very proud history of protection of human rights. We have an excellent constitution, and we have an active judiciary. And the judiciary makes sure that there's always the need to cater for the needs for all of the persons within the Republic. Yeah. I might mention that recently there was an attempt to exclude foreigners from healthcare services, and the courts were very clear. They said, no, that's not going to happen, because the Constitution extends to everyone within the borders of the Republic. Now, one can argue that that is exploited on a number of different levels, but that's not the argument that the courts accepted. The court says the Constitution makes your rights the most important, irrespective of nationality. So once again, you can see that xenophobia, the courts were saying that operations conducted by unauthorized parties or persons or whatever is not going to be tolerated.
Sure.
So again, xenophobia is an educational process, and there has to be a deep and serious look at the contribution of some of these foreigners, especially in the township economies, where they provided, as I understand, basic household goods at a cheaper rate than you could get in the open market.
Absolutely, Ashraf, and some civil society organizations have made note of the economic opportunities provided by foreign nationals to South Africans. Thank you very much for your time and insights, and just a reminder that there are 21 days in which people can comment and should comment on that draft white paper. Newsfeed AM continues with the headline.